Imagine spending 5 years risking your life in the freezing ocean to support your mother, only to come home and find her eating scraps in the mansion you bought her. I thought I was the perfect son until I opened that door. What I saw was a crime disguised by family smiles. Listen closely, because sometimes the devil isn't far away. Sometimes the devil is sitting right at your dinner table. My name is James Miller, and for the last 5 years, I have existed in a world where the sun does not shine. I am 32 years old, but when I look in the mirror, the eyes staring back at me seem ancient, rimmed with the weariness of a man who has bargained with death every single day. I worked as a saturation diver for a massive conglomerate called Apex Offshore Solutions, operating deep within the freezing, turbulent waters of the North Sea. To most people, the ocean is a place of vacation and beauty. To me, it was a black void that wanted to crush my lungs into the size of soda cans. For 28 days at a time, I lived in a pressurized chamber, no bigger than a prison cell, breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen that made my voice sound like a cartoon character, while my body fought to stay alive under pressure that would kill a normal human in seconds. It was isolation in its purest form. There was no internet, no real phone calls, just the hiss of the gas valves and the cold metallic clank of the transfer bell. We were ghosts haunting the bottom of the world, fixing pipelines and welding metal in absolute darkness. Why would anyone subject themselves to such torture? The answer was simple: the money. It was hazardous pay. It was blood money. Every time I descended into that abyss, I was not thinking about the darkness. I was thinking about the light at the end of the tunnel. I was thinking about my mother, Elena Miller. My mother had worked her fingers to the bone her entire life. She was a woman who scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets to put food on our table after my father left. She never complained. She never asked for anything. All she wanted was a place to call her own, a garden where she could grow her roses, and a kitchen where she could bake her apple pies without worrying about the landlord raising the rent. 5 years ago, I made a decision. I signed away half a decade of my life to Apex Offshore Solutions. I took every single cent of my signing bonus and my savings to buy a house. Not just any house, but a classic Victorian beauty in the suburbs of Seattle. It was her dream house. I bought it outright, cash down, put the deed in a safe place, and told her to live there like a queen. I sent nearly every paycheck home to a joint account I shared with my sister Sarah, instructing her to handle the bills and ensure Mom had everything she needed. Now that contract was finally over. My flight touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on a Tuesday afternoon. The weather was typical for the Pacific Northwest, a blanket of gray clouds weeping a steady, cold drizzle over the city. To anyone else, it was gloomy. To me, it was beautiful. It was natural air. It was rain I could feel on my skin without a survival suit. I walked out of the terminal with a single duffel bag over my shoulder, my chest swelling with a feeling I had not felt in years. Freedom. I had not told anyone I was coming home. I wanted it to be a surprise. I had played the scene over in my head 1,000 times while I was decompressing in the chamber. I would ring the doorbell. Mom would answer, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. She would scream, then cry, then hug me until my ribs hurt. Then she would rush to the oven to pull out a fresh apple pie, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg erasing the metallic taste of helium that still lingered in my throat. I hailed an Uber and gave the driver the address. As we drove away from the city and into the quiet, leafy suburbs, my heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched the familiar streets roll by. The evergreen trees, the wet pavement, the manicured lawns. It was all so normal, so peaceful. It was everything I had fought to get back to. "We are here," the driver said, pulling up to the curb. I paid him and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The rain was falling harder now, tapping a rhythm on my leather jacket. I looked up, ready to see the warm, cream-colored Victorian house with the white picket fence that I had purchased 5 years ago. My smile froze. Then it slowly vanished. The house was there, but it was not the house I remembered. The warm, inviting cream paint was gone, completely obliterated by a coat of dark, aggressive charcoal gray. It looked cold, industrial, impersonal. The charming low wooden fence that my mother loved, because it allowed her to chat with the neighbors, had been torn out. In its place stood a 6-foot-high wall made of jagged slate stone, blocking the view of the garden completely. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Maybe Sarah thought a renovation would be a nice surprise, but this did not look like something my mother would choose. My mother loved light. She loved openness. This place looked like a fortress designed to keep the world out. I walked up the driveway. The old wrought iron gate was gone, replaced by a solid steel electronic gate that looked heavy enough to stop a truck. Thankfully, the pedestrian side gate was unlocked. I pushed it open and walked up the path. The beautiful flower beds where Mom used to plant petunias and hydrangeas were gone. They had been paved over with concrete slabs and decorated with sharp, minimalist sculptures that looked like rusted metal spikes. I reached the front porch. The wicker rocking chair was missing. The welcome mat with the faded sunflowers was gone. I reached for the doorbell, expecting the old brass button. Instead, my finger hovered over a sleek, black plastic box with a camera lens, staring back at me like a cyclops eye. A smart doorbell. I pressed it. A digital chime echoed inside, but no one came to the door. I could see lights on inside. I knew someone was home. I pressed it again. Still nothing. "Mom!" I called out, my voice sounding small in the wet air. "Sarah." I decided to let myself in. I reached for the handle, intending to punch in the code on the keypad lock I had installed for Mom before I left. It was a simple code, her birthday. 1955. But there was no keypad. The lock had been changed to a high-tech biometric scanner with a fingerprint reader and a touch panel that was currently dark. I stared at it, the rain dripping from my hair down my neck. I was locked out. Locked out of the house I paid for. Panic began to rise in my throat, hot and acrid. Had something happened? Was Mom okay? I raised my fist and pounded on the solid oak door. "Mom, open the door. It's me, James." Silence. Then I heard the faint sound of footsteps. They were not the shuffling steps of an elderly woman. They were the sharp, rhythmic clicks of heels on hardwood. The lock beeped a mechanical sound of disengagement. The heavy door swung inward. I prepared my smile, ready to shout, "Surprise!" But the words died on my lips. Standing in the doorway was my younger sister, Sarah. She was 28 years old, but she looked completely different from the girl I had hugged goodbye 5 years ago. The Sarah I knew wore jeans and oversized sweaters and worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic. The woman standing in front of me looked like she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine spread for the ultra-wealthy. She was wearing a silk blouse that shimmered under the hallway lights and tailored trousers that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfectly styled in a sleek bob, and her face was contoured with heavy professional makeup. But what caught my eye immediately was the diamond ring on her finger. It was massive, glittering aggressively in the dim light. She stared at me. Her eyes went wide. Her face drained of color. She did not look happy. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hey, kiddo," I said, trying to recover the moment, though the coldness of her reaction made me shiver. "I'm back. Surprise." I moved to step inside to hug her, but she instinctively took a half step sideways, blocking the entrance. It was a subtle movement, but I caught it. She was trying to keep me on the porch. "You are not supposed to be back yet," Sarah stammered, her hands fluttering nervously near her throat. "The contract, I thought you had another month." "We finished early," I said, frowning. "Aren't you going to let me in? It is pouring out here." Before she could answer, a man appeared behind her. It was Kevin, her husband. I remembered Kevin as a guy who always had a sure-thing investment scheme that never worked out. He was a struggling real estate agent who spent more time complaining about the market than actually selling houses. 5 years ago, he wore ill-fitting suits and drove a rusted sedan. The Kevin standing there now was a different species. He was wearing a navy blue designer suit that fit him like a glove. His teeth were blindingly white, likely veneers, and he had the golden tan of someone who spent their winters in the tropics, not Seattle. "James," Kevin boomed, his voice loud and overly jovial. He pushed past Sarah and extended a hand, his smile stretching tight across his face. It did not reach his eyes. His eyes were darting around, calculating, assessing. "My God, look at you," the deep-sea man returns. "We had no idea you were coming today." "I wanted to surprise Mom," I said, ignoring his hand, and pushing past them both into the hallway. "Where is she?" I stepped into the living room, and my boots squeaked on the floor. I stopped dead in my tracks. If the outside of the house was a shock, the inside was a violation. The house I bought was full of warmth. It had heavy oak furniture, Persian rugs that Mom had collected for years, and walls filled with framed family photos. It smelled of old wood lavender and baking. That house was gone. The living room now looked like the lobby of a sterile boutique hotel. The walls were painted a stark, blinding white. The oak floors had been replaced, or covered with gray marble tiles that looked slippery and cold. The comfortable, overstuffed sofas were nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was a low, L-shaped white leather couch that looked impossible to relax on. A massive flat-screen television, easily 80 inches wide, dominated one wall. Beneath it sat a glass console table holding abstract sculptures that looked like twisted metal. There were no photos, no pictures of me, no pictures of Dad, no pictures of Mom's prize-winning roses. And the smell. The scent of apple pie was non-existent. The air was thick, almost choking with the smell of expensive, musky cologne and artificial floral air freshener. It smelled like money. It smelled like a stranger's house. I turned around slowly to face Sarah and Kevin, who were still standing near the door, hovering like nervous security guards. "What did you do to the house?" I asked, my voice low. "Where is Mom's furniture? Where is Mom?" Sarah exchanged a quick, panicked glance with Kevin. Kevin stepped forward, putting a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, shrugging him off. Now, James," Kevin said, his voice dripping with that fake oily charm. "A lot has changed in 5 years. We have made some upgrades. You know, bringing the place into the 21st century, increasing the property value. It is all for the best." "I did not ask about property value," I said, staring him dead in the eye. "I asked where my mother is." Sarah cleared her throat, fiddling with the diamond on her finger. "She is resting, James. She is not in the main house right now." "Not in the main house," I repeated. "What does that mean? This is her house. I bought it for her." "Well, yes," Kevin interjected quickly. "But you know how elderly people get. She found the big house too overwhelming. Too much space to clean, too many stairs. She prefers a quieter space." I looked around the cold, sterile room. It didn't look overwhelming. It looked empty. It looked like a stage set for people pretending to be rich. And standing there, dripping wet in my old leather jacket with the silence of the deep sea, still ringing in my ears, I realized with a sinking heart that the reunion I had dreamed of for 1,825 days was not going to happen. Something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. And the smell of that expensive cologne was starting to make me nauseous. "Take me to her," I commanded. "Now." "Take me to her," I said again, my voice cutting through the thick, perfumed air of the living room like a blade. Kevin laughed, but it was a nervous, hollow sound that rattled in his throat. He stepped between me and the hallway, holding up his hands as if he were trying to calm a spooked horse. "James, buddy, relax," Kevin said, his smile twitching at the corners. "You just got off a long flight. You are soaking wet. Why do we not sit down? I have a bottle of Cabernet that is older than Sarah. Let's catch up. We have 5 years to cover. He moved toward a sleek black lacquer cabinet in the corner, obviously trying to draw my attention away from the rest of the house. I did not move. My boots remained planted on the cold, gray marble water pooling around the soles. I watched them. I watched the way Sarah's eyes darted toward the kitchen door, then back to me, her fingers twisting that massive diamond ring, until her skin turned red. I do not want wine, Kevin, I said, keeping my tone level, though my blood was beginning to boil. I want to see my mother. You said she is in the annex. What annex? This property does not have an annex. It has a tool shed and a garage. We converted it. Sarah piped up, her voice shrill. She walked over to Kevin, linking her arm through his as if she needed his physical support to stand upright. We renovated the old garden structure. Mom loves it out there. It is her private sanctuary. You know how she gets with noise. She insisted on having her own space away from the hustle and bustle of the main house. The hustle and bustle, I repeated, looking around the silent museum-like living room. It is just the two of you living here. How much noise could you possibly be making? My eyes drifted past them to the dining area. A long table made of smoked glass sat under a chandelier that looked like an explosion of crystal shards. It was set for dinner. There were tall candles, linen napkins folded into swans and gold-rimmed plates. There were only 2 place settings, 2 chairs pulled out, 2 wine glasses, 2 forks. Where does Mom eat? I asked, pointing a wet finger at the table. Sarah flinched. She eats in her room. Like I said, she prefers the quiet. She prefers to eat alone. I took a step forward, the water from my jacket dripping onto their pristine floor. Mom is the most social person I know. She used to drag neighbors off the street just to feed them lasagna. You expect me to believe she wants to eat a TV dinner alone in a shed while you two pretend to be royalty in here? It is not like that. Kevin snapped his facade of friendliness, cracking for a second before he plastered it back on. Look, James, there is something we did not want to tell you over the phone. We did not want you to worry while you were underwater. He sighed dramatically, shaking his head with a look of practiced sorrow. It is her mind, James, Sarah whispered, leaning forward conspiratorially. Mom is not the same. She has dementia, early onset but aggressive. The doctor said it is best if she stays in a controlled environment. She gets confused, violent even, especially with faces she thinks she knows, but cannot quite place. The word hit me like a physical blow. Dementia. I had spoken to her on the phone a few months ago. Her voice had sounded tired, yes, and perhaps a bit distant, but she had asked about my work. She had asked if I was eating enough. She had sounded like Mom. I talked to her in October, I said, narrowing my eyes. She sounded fine. That is the thing about the disease, Kevin said smoothly, pouring himself a glass of wine, even though I had refused. It comes and goes. Sundowning, they call it. At night, she gets worse. If you go out there now, unannounced, soaking wet, looking like a stranger, you will terrify her. She might have a heart attack. Do you want that on your conscience? They were blocking my path, physically blocking me. Sarah stood with her hip against the hallway console, and Kevin stood in the center of the rug. They were like gatekeepers to a fortress armed with lies and expensive clothes, but I was a saturation diver. I had spent 5 years walking on the bottom of the ocean, dragging heavy welding cables against currents that could snap a man's spine. I was not going to be stopped by a failed real estate agent and my little sister in a silk blouse. I am going to see her, I said, and if she does not recognize me, I will remind her. I stepped forward. Kevin moved to intercept me, putting a hand on my chest. James, I am telling you, I did not hit him. I simply walked through him. I shoved his shoulder with enough force to send him stumbling back into the glass console table. The abstract metal sculptures rattled dangerously. Hey, Kevin shouted, spilling his wine onto the white rug. "You cannot just—" I ignored him. I marched down the hallway past the kitchen. I glanced inside as I passed. The kitchen I remembered had yellow walls and smelled of yeast and vanilla. This kitchen was a laboratory of stainless steel and black granite. The counters were empty. No flour jar, no cookie tin, no sign that anyone actually cooked here. It looked like a showroom. I reached the back door. It was locked. I unlocked it, threw it open, and stepped out into the rain. The backyard was dark. The floodlights from the main house cut through the gloom, illuminating the rain that fell in sheets. I looked across the yard. The beautiful vegetable garden where Mom used to grow tomatoes and peppers was gone, replaced by a sleek, rectangular swimming pool that glowed with an eerie blue light from underwater LEDs. It was covered with a tarp, useless in this weather. Beyond the pool, in the far corner of the property, stood the old tool shed. Sarah had called it a renovated guest suite. I walked toward it, my boots sinking into the muddy grass. As I got closer, my heart began to hammer against my ribs again, but this time it was not excitement. It was dread. The structure had not been renovated. The wood siding was rotting at the bottom, darkened by dampness. The roof was still the old corrugated tin I remembered, now rusted and sagging in the middle. There was no porch light, no walkway, just a muddy path leading to a door that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrapyard. "Mom!" I called out the wind, whipping the word away. There was a small window on the side, covered by a thin, dirty piece of fabric. I could see a faint, yellow light flickering inside. Not the warm glow of a lamp, but the harsh, weak light of a naked bulb or a cheap heater. I reached the door. There was no handle, just a latch. I lifted it and pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, a sound of neglected metal grinding on rust. The smell hit me first. It was not the smell of lavender. It was the smell of damp wool mildew and the sharp medicinal sting of tiger balm. It was the smell of poverty. It was the smell of a room that had never seen the sun. I stepped inside, ducking my head under the low door frame. The room was tiny, no bigger than a prison cell. The concrete floor was bare and stained with moisture. In the corner sat a single twin mattress on a metal frame covered with a thin, gray wool blanket. There was no television. There were no bookshelves. There were no photos of me or Sarah or Dad. In the center of the room, sitting on a wooden stool under a single dangling light bulb, was a woman. She was hunched over her face, inches from a pile of dark fabric in her lap. She was working her hands, moving with a frantic, jerky rhythm. She was sewing. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. This was the woman who had raised me. This was the woman who had laughed so loud it made the neighbors smile. This was the woman who had always been plump, with rosy cheeks and hair dyed a vibrant chestnut brown, because she said it made her feel young. The woman on the stool was a skeleton. She was wearing a shapeless gray tunic that looked like a janitor's uniform. Her hair had been chopped short unevenly, as if someone had taken kitchen scissors to it in the dark. It was completely white. Her skin was gray, translucent, like parchment paper, stretched tight over her cheekbones. She was shivering. I looked down and saw a small, orange electric space heater at her feet. The coils were dark. It was broken. The room was freezing, colder than the air outside. She did not look up when I entered. She just kept stitching, her fingers trembling violently. I could see the swollen knuckles of her arthritis, the red, angry inflammation around the joints. She was forcing a needle through heavy black fabric. I recognized it instantly. It was a suit jacket. A designer suit jacket, the kind Kevin was wearing. "Mom," I whispered. The word hung in the cold air. She froze. Her shoulders hunched up toward her ears, a reflex of pure terror. She did not turn around. She slowly lowered the needle, her head bowing low, her chin touching her chest. "I am sorry," she whispered. Her voice was cracked dry, as if she had not used it for conversation in weeks. "Mom, it is me," I said, my voice breaking. I took a step toward her. "It is James." She flinched at the sound of my boots on the concrete. She spun around on the stool, her eyes wide, staring at me. But there was no recognition in them. There was only a primal, animalistic fear. Her pupils were dilated, glassy, darting frantically around my silhouette. She did not see her son. She saw a man standing in the doorway of her prison. She slid off the stool, her knees hitting the cold concrete with a sickening thud. She cowered back against the wall, pulling the half-sewn suit jacket against her chest, like a shield. "I am sorry, Master," she stammered, her voice rising in panic. "I am sorry, Kevin. I know I am slow. My hands, the cold makes them stiff. Please, please do not be angry." I stood there, paralyzed. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Master Kevin. "Mom, look at me." I choked out tears, hot and stinging in my eyes. "It is James, your son. I am home." She blinked, squinting through the gloom. For a second, a flicker of confusion crossed her face. She tilted her head, her lips trembling. "James?" she breathed. "Yes," I said, reaching out a hand. "Yes, Mom, it is me." But then the shadow of fear slammed back down over her face. She shook her head violently, squeezing her eyes shut. "No," she whimpered. "No, no, no. James is gone. James is at sea. He is working. He is a good boy." She opened her eyes and looked at me, not with love, but with a terrifying desperation. "You are testing me. Kevin said you would test me. He said if I imagined things, I would get no dinner." She scrambled forward on her knees, clutching the hem of my wet jeans with her arthritic fingers. "I am sorry, sir," she begged, looking up at me with eyes that were hollowed out by hunger and submission. "I will finish the suit, I promise. It is just a small tear. I can fix it, please. Please do not cut my dinner tonight. I am so hungry. Please, sir." I looked down at my mother, the woman I had crossed oceans for, the woman I had spent $300,000 to protect. She was on her knees begging me for food, thinking I was the man who had enslaved her. Something inside me broke. It was not a quiet break. It was the sound of a structural support snapping under too much pressure. It was the sound of the deep sea rushing in. I fell to my knees and wrapped my arms around her. She was so thin I could feel every rib through the coarse fabric of her uniform. She smelled of old oil and neglect. She stiffened in my arms, terrified, waiting for a blow that never came. "It is okay," I sobbed into her shoulder, my voice raw. "It is okay, Mom. I am here. I am going to kill them. I swear to God I am going to kill them." But she did not understand. She just lay limp in my arms, shivering, waiting for permission to stand up, waiting for permission to eat, waiting for a mercy that had been absent from this house for a very long time. Behind me, I heard the squelch of footsteps on the grass. "James!" Sarah's voice rang out from the doorway, breathless and panicked. "James, get away from her. You are confusing her." I slowly released my mother. I stood up. The tears on my face were cold, but the fire in my chest was an inferno. I turned around to face the open door where my sister and her husband stood under an umbrella, looking at the scene with a mixture of annoyance and fear. They did not look like family anymore. They looked like prey. I fell to my knees on the damp concrete, wrapping my arms around the fragile skeleton that used to be my mother. For a long, agonizing moment, she remained rigid, her body vibrating with a terror so deep, it felt like an electric current humming against my chest. I could feel the sharp ridges of her spine through the thin, rough fabric of her gray tunic. She smelled of stale sweat mildew, and the distinct acrid scent of fear. "Mom," I whispered again, my voice cracking under the weight of 5 years of absence. "It is me. It is James. I am here." Slowly, painfully, she pulled her head back. Her eyes clouded with cataracts, and confusion searched my face. She traced the line of my jaw with a trembling, calloused finger. The recognition did not hit her all at once. It came in waves, fighting through the fog of trauma, and whatever drugs were coursing through her system. James, she breathed the name, barely a ghost of a sound. My Jimmy. Yes, Mom, it is Jimmy. Her face crumbled. A sob rose in her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. But before it could escape her lips, she clamped a hand over her mouth. Her eyes darted wildly to the open door of the shed, her pupils expanding in panic. She swallowed the cry, choking it down, until it was just a wet gasp in her lungs. Shh, she hissed, pushing against my chest with surprising strength. You must not be here, you must not. If he sees you, if he knows I stopped working. I do not care about him, I growled, holding her tighter. I am taking you out of here. Right now. No. She gripped my leather jacket, her knuckles white. No, James. You do not understand. The list. I have not finished the list. The suit is silver. Before I could answer, the doorway darkened. The rain outside was falling harder, creating a curtain of noise, but the voice that cut through it was sharp and distinct. Elena. Kevin stepped into the shed. He filled the small space with his expensive suit and his suffocating cologne. He did not look at me. He looked straight at my mother with a mixture of disappointment and annoyance, like one might look at a dog that had chewed a slipper. What did we discuss about bothering the guests, Elena? Kevin said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register that made my mother flinch violently in my arms. James has just traveled halfway across the world. He is tired. He does not need to see you like this. Then, as if flipping a switch, he turned his gaze to me. The menace evaporated, replaced instantly by that oily used car salesman concern. James, I am so sorry, he said, shaking his head. We try to keep the door locked for her own safety, but the latch is tricky. Come on, let's get you back to the main house. Sarah is pouring the wine. The rage that had been simmering in my gut since I saw the gray paint on the house finally boiled over. It was a white-hot explosion in the center of my chest. I stood up. I moved faster than I had ever moved in the water. 1 second I was kneeling, and the next I had crossed the 3 feet of concrete between us. I grabbed Kevin by the lapels of his navy blue designer jacket, a jacket bought with my money, and slammed him backward against the rough wooden wall of the shed. The impact shook the flimsy structure. Dust and rust rained down from the ceiling. You animal, I snarled, my face inches from his. I could see the pores on his nose, the sweat breaking out on his forehead. You put my mother in a shed. You treat her like a slave in the house I paid for? James, stop. Sarah screamed from the doorway. She rushed in, her heels sinking into the dirt floor, her hands grabbing at my arm. Let him go, she shrieked. You are crazy. You are going to kill him. Give me one reason why I should not, I spat, tightening my grip on Kevin's collar until his face began to turn a mottled shade of red. He is starving her, Sarah. Look at her. She weighs 80 pounds. Get off him. Sarah clawed at my face, her nails scratching my cheek. I will call the police, I swear to God, James. I will call the police and have you arrested for assault and trespassing. Trespassing! I laughed, a harsh barking sound. It is my name on the deed, Sarah. My money. Not anymore, Sarah yelled. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I froze. I loosened my grip on Kevin just enough for him to gasp for air. He slid down the wall, coughing, massaging his throat, but his eyes were gleaming with triumph. Sarah stepped between us, her chest heaving. She reached into her Prada handbag and pulled out a thick, folded envelope. She held it up like a shield. You have been gone 5 years, James, she said, her voice shaking, but defiant. You have been in a metal tube at the bottom of the ocean. You do not know what it has been like here. You do not know how bad she got. She threw the envelope at me. It landed on the dirt floor at my feet. Read it, she commanded. I kept my eyes on them, wary of a sucker punch, as I bent down to retrieve the papers. I unfolded them with one hand. They were medical documents. Official-looking seals, signatures, heavy formatting. Diagnostic report, Elena Miller. I read the header. Advanced Alzheimer's disease. Frontotemporal dementia with severe behavioral disturbances. I flipped the page. There was a legal document attached. Power of attorney. Guardianship order, signed by a judge 2 years ago. It granted Sarah and Kevin full legal control over Elena Miller's assets, healthcare, and living arrangements due to her incapacity. It is a lie, I said, crumpling the paper in my fist. She knew me. She recognized me just now. That is a lucid moment, Kevin croaked, straightening his tie. They happen. But 5 minutes ago she thought I was her father. Yesterday she thought she was back in 1982 working at the hotel. Why do you think she is wearing that uniform, James? You think we forced her? Kevin let out a scoffing laugh, gaining confidence now that Sarah had produced the paperwork. She demands to wear it, he said, gesturing to my mother, who was still cowering on the floor, clutching her sewing. She thinks she is a maid. If we try to take it off, she screams. She attacks us. The doctor calls it role immersion. We are advised to play along to keep her calm. We are doing exactly what the professionals told us to do. And the shed. I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed violence. The doctor told you to put her in a freezing shed with no bathroom. Incontinence, Sarah said quickly. Too quickly. She refuses to wear diapers. She ruined the carpets in the main house. We had to replace them twice. It was a health hazard, James. The doctor said she needed a space that was easy to clean somewhere she felt contained. She likes small spaces. It makes her feel safe. I looked at my mother. She was rocking back and forth, muttering to herself. I will finish it, sir. I will finish it. Do not be mad. I walked over to her. I knelt down again, ignoring the filth on the floor. I took her face in my hands. Her skin was paper-thin but hot. Too hot. I looked into her eyes. The pupils were blown wide, swallowing the irises. Her lips were cracked and dry, a white film gathering at the corners. I had medical training. You do not become a saturation diver without knowing advanced first aid and physiology. She is not just senile, I said quietly. She is drugged. I looked up at Sarah. Her pupils are dilated. Her mouth is dry. She has tremors. What are you giving her? Prescription medication. Sarah defended, though her eyes shifted away from mine. Antipsychotics, to stop the violent outbursts, to help her sleep. You are not a doctor, James. You are just a welder. I am taking her, I said, standing up and lifting my mother into my arms. She was light, terrifyingly light, like a bird made of hollow bones. I do not care what that paper says. I am taking her to a real hospital. No. It wasn't Sarah who screamed, it was my mother. She began to thrash in my arms, a sudden burst of frantic, terrified energy. She clawed at my chest, kicking her legs. Put me down, she shrieked, her eyes rolling back in her head. No, Miss Sarah, tell him I am good. I did not steal anything, do not send me away. She reached out toward Sarah, her hands grasping for my sister's silk blouse. Please, Miss Sarah, my mother begged, tears streaming down her gray face. I will clean the floor again. I will do it better this time. Do not let him take me to the black room, please. I froze. The black room. My mother struggled out of my grip. She stumbled across the uneven floor and threw herself at Sarah's feet, wrapping her arms around my sister's legs. She buried her face in Sarah's expensive trousers, sobbing hysterically. See? Sarah looked down at me, a look of twisted victory on her face. She patted our mother's head with a condescending, hesitant touch, like one would pet a stray animal they did not want to touch. She is terrified of strangers. She thinks you are taking her to an asylum. You are making it worse, James. Kevin stepped forward, emboldened by the scene. You have no legal standing here, James. We are her guardians. If you try to take her by force, that is kidnapping. We will call the cops. And given your emotional state and that little assault on me just now, who do you think they will believe? The concerned daughter and her husband, or the estranged son who just broke into the house? I stood there, my hands empty, the rain pounding on the tin roof above us. I looked at my mother cowering at the feet of her abuser, seeking protection from the very person who had enslaved her. It was the most painful thing I had ever seen. It broke me in a way the pressure of the deep ocean never could. I realized then that I could not win this with fists. Not tonight. If I got arrested, I would be in a cell and she would be alone with them. They would punish her for my actions. They would hurt her, and I would be powerless to stop it. I had to be smarter. I had to be the diver. I had to assess the pressure, check the life support, and plan the ascent. Panic was death. I forced my muscles to relax. I unclenched my fists. I took a deep breath, letting the cold, damp air fill my lungs. Okay, I said. The word hung in the air. Sarah blinked, surprised. Kevin narrowed his eyes. Okay, Kevin repeated. You are right, I lied. The words tasted like bile in my mouth. I have been gone a long time. I don't know the situation. I overreacted. I ran a hand through my wet hair, feigning exhaustion. The decompression, the flight, my head is not right. I just wanted to see her. I did not know it was this bad. I looked at my mother one last time. She was still clinging to Sarah, whimpering. I wanted to burn the world down, but I forced myself to look defeated. I cannot stay here, I said, looking at the floor. I cannot see her like this. It is too much. It is a shock, Sarah said, her voice softening, thinking she had won. We understand. Why do you not go get some rest? There is a nice hotel downtown. We can talk tomorrow, when you are calm. Yeah, I said, tomorrow. I just need to sleep. I turned around and walked out of the shed. I did not look back. If I looked back, I would have killed them both with my bare hands. I walked back through the rain, past the glowing blue pool, past the cold gray house, and out the iron gate. I walked until I was out of sight of the security cameras. Then I stopped leaning against a tree and vomited into the gutter. I wiped my mouth, my hand shaking, not with cold but with pure, crystallized hatred. I did not go downtown. I walked 3 blocks to a seedy, rundown motel called the Whispering Pines that I had passed in the Uber. I paid cash for a room on the 2nd floor. Room 204. It faced the back of my old neighborhood. I did not sleep. I did not unpack. I opened my duffel bag and took out the equipment I had brought with me. Not clothes, but gear. High-powered binoculars I used for spotting surface support vessels. A digital camera with a telephoto lens. I set up a tripod in the dark, positioning it near the window. I turned off all the lights in the room, so my silhouette would not be visible. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clear and cold. Through the binoculars, the back of my house, their house, was visible. The distance was about 400 yards, but with the lens it felt like I was standing in the yard. I saw the lights in the main house. The living room was glowing. I adjusted the focus. There, framed in the massive floor-to-ceiling window, were Sarah and Kevin. They were sitting on the white leather couch. Kevin had his feet up on the coffee table. He was laughing, raising a wine glass and a toast. Sarah was checking her phone, smiling. Then movement in the background caught my eye. My breath hitched. Behind them, in the brightly lit hallway, a small gray figure was moving. It was my mother. She was on her hands and knees. She was pushing a rag across the marble floor. She paused to dip the rag into a bucket, wringing it out with her crippled, arthritic hands. She scrubbed a spot, then crawled forward a few inches and scrubbed again. Kevin said something to Sarah, and they both laughed. Kevin gestured toward the hallway, likely barking an order. My mother's head dipped lower and she scrubbed faster. I watched them. I watched my sister drinking wine bought with my life's blood. I watched her husband laughing in the house I built. And I watched the woman who gave me life being treated like livestock. I did not look away. I forced myself to watch every second of it. I wanted the image burned into my retinas. I wanted the hatred to solidify, to turn from hot rage into cold, hard steel. "Enjoy the wine, Kevin," I whispered to the empty motel room. "Enjoy it while you can." The diver was gone. The sun was gone. The only thing left in room 204 was a hunter. And the season had just opened. The next morning the sun rose over Seattle, but I did not feel its warmth. I felt cold, calculated, and sharp. The emotional wreck who had vomited in the gutter the night before was gone. In his place was the engineer, the problem solver, the man who knew that panic burned oxygen and logic saved lives. I had a target. I had a mission, and I needed a team. At 7 in the morning, I called Mike. Mike was a guy I had served with in the military before I went commercial. He was now a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud and background checks. He was the kind of guy who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who manufactured the needle and how much they paid for the steel. James. His voice was rough with sleep. "I have not heard from you in 3 years. You in trouble." "I need a full financial forensic sweep," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "And I need a background check on a doctor. I am sending you the names and social security numbers. I need everything, Mike. Bank statements, credit card history, property liens. Dig deep." "Who is the target?" Mike asked, the sleep vanishing from his voice. "My sister, her husband, and my mother." "Your mother, James, what is going on?" "Just do it, Mike. I will wire you $5,000 as a retainer within the hour." I hung up. Step 1 was in motion. Now for step 2, human intelligence. I waited until I saw Sarah's silver Mercedes pull out of the driveway. Kevin followed 10 minutes later in a black Land Rover that I knew for a fact cost more than my first 2 years of diving salary combined. Once they were gone, I slipped out of the motel. I did not go to my house. I went next door. Mrs. Watson had lived next to us since I was 6 years old. She was the neighborhood watch commander, a woman who knew exactly what day trash was collected and which teenagers were smoking behind the garages. If anyone knew what had happened in that house over the last 5 years, it was her. I knocked on her back door. It took a moment, but the curtain moved and then the door opened a crack. Mrs. Watson looked older, frail, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. She peered at me through thick glasses. "Mrs. Watson," I said softly. "It is James, Elena's son." Her eyes widened behind the lenses. She opened the door fully, but she did not smile. She looked at me with a mixture of shock and accusation. "James Miller," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We thought you were dead, or worse." "Worse?" "We thought you had abandoned her," she said, stepping back to let me in. "Come in quickly. I do not want them to see you." I sat in her kitchen, which smelled exactly the same as it had 20 years ago, like yeast and peppermint. Mrs. Watson poured me a cup of tea, her hands trembling. "Tell me everything," I said. "It started about 6 months after you left." She began, sitting opposite me. "That husband of Sarah's moved in. At first it seemed fine. They were painting, fixing things up. But then the shouting started. Terrible shouting. Kevin has a temper, James. We could hear him screaming through the walls." "Did you see my mother?" "Rarely," she whispered. "At first she would come out to garden, but she looked sad, scared. Then about 2 years ago they put up that stone wall. We stopped seeing her, but we heard her." Mrs. Watson leaned in close. "I heard her crying in the backyard, James. Late at night, and I saw her. I saw her out there in the pouring rain last winter. She was scrubbing the patio stones in November. She was wearing thin clothes, and that man was standing under the awning smoking a cigarette watching her. I called the police once. You did? I asked, my grip tightening on the teacup. I did. They came. Sarah met them at the door. She showed them papers. She told them her mother had dementia and was prone to wandering and compulsive cleaning. She said they were managing it. The police left. What could they do? Sarah is her legal guardian. Mrs. Watson reached across the table and squeezed my hand. James, that woman is not crazy. She is terrified. Every time I tried to talk to her over the fence, she would run away like a beaten dog. I left Mrs. Watson's house an hour later, my heart heavy, but my resolve harder than diamond. I had witness testimony. Now I needed the paper trail. Mike called me back that afternoon. I was sitting in my motel room watching the house through the telephoto lens. James, are you sitting down? Mike asked. Just give it to me. It is a bloodbath, buddy. I pulled the records for the joint account you were sending money to. Over the last 5 years, you deposited exactly $312,450. And the balance, $42.16. I closed my eyes. $300,000. That was 5 years of freezing darkness, 5 years of missing birthdays, Christmases, and sunsets. Gone. Where did it go? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Everywhere, Mike said, the sound of papers rustling in the background. Designer clothing boutiques, high-end car leases, 5-star resorts in Cabo and Aspen. But the big chunks. They went to a series of shell companies that look like cryptocurrency scams. Kevin has been investing, and he is terrible at it. He lost nearly $100,000 in a single week last year. Is that it? No, Mike said, and his voice dropped an octave. That is the good news. The bad news is the house. I bought the house cash, I said. There is no mortgage. There is now, Mike corrected. 18 months ago, Sarah used her power of attorney to take out a home equity loan against the property. A big one. $500,000. The house is leveraged to the hilt, James. And guess what? Kevin has gambling debts. I found transfers to some very shady offshore accounts that scream bookie. So they had not just stolen my cash. They had stolen the equity. They had stolen the safety net. If they stopped paying, the bank would take the house. My mother would be homeless. What about the doctor? I asked. The one who signed the dementia diagnosis. Dr. Arnold Zeman, Mike said with a scoff. I found him. He is not a neurologist. He is a general practitioner who lost his license in Florida 4 years ago for pill mill operations. He moved here and set up a concierge medicine practice. He is a gun for hire, James. You pay him $500, he will sign a paper saying you are the King of England. That diagnosis is worth less than the paper it is printed on. Thanks, Mike. Send me the files. I hung up. I had the motive, financial ruin and greed. I had the method, medical fraud and legal manipulation. Now I needed the proof of abuse. The kind of proof that no lawyer could talk their way out of. I waited until 2 a.m. The lights in the main house had finally gone out. I dressed in black, pulled a beanie over my head, and slipped out of the motel. I did not go to the front door. I went to the alleyway behind the house, where the trash bins were lined up for collection the next morning. I was a saturation diver. I was used to working in filth. Digging through trash was a walk in the park. I opened the bin labeled recycling. It was full of wine bottles, dozens of them, expensive stuff. I moved to the general waste bin. It smelled of rotting food and cat litter. I dug through the bags carefully, using a small flashlight in my mouth. Halfway down, I found a small, transparent bag filled with empty pharmacy blister packs. I pulled it out and shone the light on the foil. Clozapine, I read the label. 100 milligrams. I pulled out my phone and searched the drug. It was an antipsychotic, a heavy one, used for schizophrenia. It was a chemical straitjacket. One of the side effects listed was sedation, confusion, and muscle tremors. They were not treating dementia. They were inducing it. They were poisoning her to keep her compliant, to make her look crazy, so no one would believe her if she complained. I bagged the evidence and slipped back into the shadows. The next day was Thursday. I knew from my surveillance that Kevin usually went to the gym, or wherever he pretended to go around 10. Sarah usually slept in until noon. I set up my camera on the tripod. I had a clear view of the kitchen window and the back patio. Around 11 in the morning, the back door opened. My mother stepped out. She was carrying a heavy bucket of water and a rag. She knelt on the patio stones. It was raining lightly. She began to scrub the stones. My blood ran cold. Then the door opened again. Kevin walked out. He was not at the gym. He was wearing a bathrobe and holding a glass of juice. He stood over her, saying something. I could see his mouth moving, his face twisted in a sneer. My mother stopped scrubbing. She looked up at him, saying something back. She tried to stand up, her legs shaking. As she rose, her elbow bumped the patio table. A glass that had been sitting there, left over from their party the night before, tipped over and shattered on the stones. Kevin exploded. Through the zoom lens, I saw his face turn purple. He did not help her. He did not ask if she was okay. He reared back and threw the contents of his juice glass right in her face. My mother gasped, blinding by the liquid. She stumbled back, slipping on the wet stones. She fell hard on her hip. Kevin did not stop. He grabbed the bucket of dirty water she had been using, cold, soapy gray water, and heaved it over her prone body. "Clean it up." I could read his lips perfectly. "Clean it up now." He kicked the empty bucket toward her, turned around, and slammed the sliding glass door shut. My mother lay there in the rain, soaked in juice and dirty water, surrounded by broken glass. She did not cry. She just slowly, painfully crawled toward the bucket. I stopped recording. My hand was shaking so hard I almost knocked the camera over. I had it. I had the financial records proving theft. I had the fake medical history. I had the toxic prescription drugs in the trash. And now, I had high-definition video evidence of physical assault and elder abuse. I sat down on the edge of the motel bed. I wanted to run over there and tear his throat out. Every fiber of my being screamed for violence. But I looked at the camera. This memory card was the only weapon that mattered. If I attacked him now, he would claim self-defense. Sarah would back him up. I would go to jail and my mother would disappear into a state facility or worse. Number 1. I needed to finish this properly. I picked up my phone and dialed Mike again. "I have the evidence," I said. "All of it." "Good," Mike said. "What is the play? Do we go to the cops?" "Not yet," I said, my voice cold. "The police take time. They will file a report, they will investigate. Sarah will call her lawyer, and they will drag this out for months while my mother rots in that shed. I need to break the guardianship immediately. I need an emergency intervention." "So what are you going to do?" "Tomorrow is Thanksgiving," I said, looking at the calendar on the wall. "I saw the catering van pull up earlier. They are having a party, a big one." "James, do not do anything stupid." "I am not going to be stupid, Mike. I am going to be theatrical." I looked out the window at the gray house. I could see Sarah moving in the bedroom, probably picking out her outfit for the party. She had no idea that the brother she thought was broken and defeated was currently assembling a nuclear bomb of evidence, just 300 yards away. I need a lawyer, Mike. The sharkiest, meanest elder law attorney you know. And I need 2 off-duty cops who want to make some easy overtime providing security for a civil standby. "I can arrange that," Mike said slowly. "What is the plan?" "The plan is simple," I said, ejecting the memory card and holding it up to the light. "I am going to attend the party, and I am going to bring the entertainment. Thanksgiving is supposed to be a day of gratitude, It is supposed to be a day where families gather around a warm table, share a meal, and count their blessings. But as I stood on the wet porch of my own house, flanked by two off-duty police officers and a shark of a lawyer named Richard Sterling, I did not feel an ounce of gratitude. I felt like a loaded gun waiting for the trigger to be pulled. Inside, the party was in full swing. Through the gaps in the blinds, I could see the golden glow of the chandelier reflecting off the wine glasses. I could hear the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of expensive cutlery. Sarah and Kevin had invited the neighborhood's elite people. They wanted to impress people whose approval they desperately craved. They were playing the role of the perfect, successful couple in their perfect, stolen home. "Are we ready, Mr. Miller?" Officer Henderson asked quietly, his hand resting near his belt. "Wait for the signal," I said, my eyes fixed on the window. "I want them to commit the crime in front of an audience." I did not have to wait long. The dining room door swung open. The conversation inside died down as the main course was brought out. But it was not a hired caterer carrying the massive 20-pound roasted turkey. It was my mother. She was struggling. The silver platter was visibly too heavy for her frail arms. She was wearing a ridiculous, ruffled black and white maid's uniform that was 2 sizes too big, making her look like a child playing dress-up. Her face was pale beaded with sweat, and her eyes were fixed on the floor in intense concentration. She was trembling. Every step was a battle against gravity and arthritis. I saw Kevin sitting at the head of the table, a napkin tucked into his collar, watching her with a smirk. Sarah was at the other end, gesturing impatiently for her to hurry up. "Careful, Elena," Kevin called out loud enough for me to hear through the glass. "That is a $300 bird. Do not drop it like you dropped the gravy boat." The guests chuckled nervously. They thought it was a joke. They thought this was some quaint family dynamic where Grandma liked to help out. They did not see the terror in her eyes. My mother reached the edge of the table. She tried to lift the heavy platter up to place it on the trivet. Her arms shook violently. The weight shifted. The grease on the platter made it slick. It happened in slow motion. The silver tray slipped from her grasp. The turkey, hot and dripping with oil, crashed onto the pristine white rug. The sound was a dull thud, followed by the clatter of the silver tray spinning across the floor. Grease splattered onto the legs of the guests. The room went dead silent. My mother stood there, her empty hands still held out, staring at the ruin on the floor. She looked small. She looked destroyed. Then Sarah moved. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She marched over to our mother, ignoring the guests, ignoring the holiday spirit, ignoring everything but her own embarrassed vanity. "You useless old hag!" Sarah screamed. And then she slapped her. It was a hard, vicious backhand that echoed through the room. My mother's head snapped to the side. She stumbled back, clutching her cheek, and fell to her knees beside the ruined turkey. "I told you to be careful," Sarah shrieked, raising her hand again. "Look at my rug! Look at what you did!" Kevin stood up, grabbing a fistful of napkins. "Get her out of here, Sarah. Lock her in the shed. I will deal with her later." That was the signal. "Now," I yelled. I did not use the key. I did not ring the bell. I stepped back and drove the heel of my boot into the center of the front door, right next to the lock. The wood splintered with a loud crack. I kicked again, harder, putting 5 years of deep-sea pressure behind the blow. The frame gave way, and the door flew open, banging against the interior wall. I stormed into the hallway, the rain sweeping in behind me. Officer Henderson and his partner followed, their hands on their holsters. Richard Sterling walked in last, carrying a briefcase like a weapon. The silence in the dining room shattered. Guests screamed. Kevin dropped his napkin. Sarah froze with her hands still raised over our mother. "Nobody move!" I roared, my voice filling the cavernous house. I walked straight into the dining room. My boots left muddy prints on the white marble, but I did not care. I looked like a nightmare. I was unshaven, wearing my old work jacket, my eyes burning with a cold fire. "James." Sarah gasped, her face draining of color. She lowered her hand slowly. "James, you cannot just burst in here. This is a private party." "Get away from her," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I walked past the stunned guests and stood between Sarah and my mother. I looked down at Mom. She was cowering on the floor, trying to scoop up the greasy turkey with her bare hands, muttering apologies to the rug. "I am sorry, Miss Sarah." Mom was whispering, blood trickling from her lip where Sarah had struck her. "I will pay for it. Please do not hit me again." I felt something snap inside me, but I held it back. Not yet. "Kevin," I said, turning to face him. Kevin was trying to regain his composure. He puffed out his chest, looking at the police officers. "Officers, remove this man. He is trespassing. I have a restraining order in process." "Actually," I said, pulling my smartphone out of my pocket, "I think the guests would like to see the evening entertainment before they leave." I pointed the phone at the massive 80-inch smart TV mounted on the wall. I had already paired it with the system from outside. Kevin's Wi-Fi password was predictably simple. "What are you doing?" Kevin demanded, stepping forward. "Showing them who you really are," I said. I hit play. The massive screen flickered to life. The video I had recorded yesterday appeared in high definition. It showed the patio in the rain. It showed my mother on her knees scrubbing the stones. The guests turned to watch, confused. Then on the screen, Kevin walked out in his bathrobe. The audio was crisp. His voice boomed through the surround sound speakers. Clean it up now." The guests gasped as they watched the on-screen Kevin throw the glass of juice into the old woman's face. They watched him dump the bucket of dirty water over her shivering body. They watched him kick the bucket at her and walk away. The room in reality was deathly silent, save for the video playing on the loop. I swiped to the next file. Photos of the medical records. The fake diagnosis signed by the disgraced doctor. The bank statements showing the withdrawals for casinos and luxury cars. "That is a lie!" Sarah screamed, lunging for the remote control on the sideboard. "Turn it off. It is fake. It is AI. He made it up." "It is not fake, Sarah," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "And neither is the slap you just gave her in front of 20 witnesses." I turned to the guests. "Get out," I said calmly. "Unless you want to be named as an accomplice in an elder abuse lawsuit, I suggest you leave. Now." The guests did not need to be told twice. They grabbed their coats and purses, scrambling over each other to get out the front door, leaving their wine and half-eaten appetizers behind. Kevin was cornered. He looked at the fleeing guests, then at the police, and finally at me. His face twisted into a snarl. He realized the game was up. His reputation was gone. His money was gone. He decided to go out fighting. "You think you can come back here and ruin my life?" Kevin shouted, grabbing a heavy steak knife from the table. "I built this life. This is my house." "Drop the knife," Officer Henderson shouted, drawing his taser. But Kevin ignored him. He lunged at me. He was slow. He was soft. He was a man who fought with lawyers and lies, not with his hands. I did not step back. I stepped into him. I caught his wrist with my left hand, twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. Then I pulled back my right fist. I thought about the 5 years of darkness. I thought about the freezing cold of the North Sea. I thought about the $300,000. I thought about my mother sleeping in a shed. I thought about the juice on her face. I unleashed it all, my fist connected with his jaw with a sickening crunch. It was a solid, perfect connection. The force lifted him off his feet. He spun in the air and crashed onto the dining table, shattering the crystal glasses and collapsing the table under his weight. He did not get up. He lay there among the ruins of the Thanksgiving feast, groaning, blood pouring from his mouth. "That," I said, shaking my hand out, was for the turkey. Sarah screamed a high, piercing sound. She tried to run for the back door, but Officer Henderson was faster. He grabbed her arm and spun her around. "Sarah Miller," the officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto her wrists. "You are under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, and assault." "No," Sarah wailed, kicking and struggling. "I am her guardian. You cannot do this. He is the crazy one, Kevin. Do something." But Kevin was unconscious on the floor, being cuffed by the other officer. "Mr. Sterling." My lawyer stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the sideboard. "Mrs. Sarah Miller," Sterling said, his voice smooth and cold. "We are also filing immediate motions to revoke your power of attorney. We have evidence of forgery regarding the property deed transfer. This house belongs to James Miller. You are being evicted effective immediately." "It is my house," Sarah sobbed as they dragged her toward the door. She looked at me, her eyes filled with hate. "I hate you. I wish you had died in that ocean." "I know," I said quietly. But I did not. The police dragged them out. The flashing lights of the patrol cars illuminated the rain-slicked driveway. The sirens wailed, announcing their disgrace to the entire neighborhood. The room fell silent again. The only sound was the soft whimpering from the floor. I turned back to my mother. She was still on her knees, trembling violently. She had her hands over her head as if waiting for a beating. The violence, the shouting, the police, it had all been too much for her fragile mind. "I am sorry," she sobbed into the carpet. "I am sorry, Kevin. I am sorry, Miss Sarah. I did not mean to break the party. Please do not put me in the dark room." My heart broke all over again. The victory over Kevin and Sarah felt hollow when I looked at the wreckage they had left behind in her mind. I knelt down beside her, ignoring the grease and the wine stains. "Mom," I said softly. She flinched away from me. No, I will clean it, I promise." "Mom, look at me," I said, my voice thick with tears. "They are gone. Kevin is gone. Sarah is gone. They can never hurt you again." She peeked out from behind her hands. She looked at the empty room. She looked at the broken table where Kevin had fallen. "Gone," she whispered. "Yes, gone." I reached out and gently took her hands. Her fingers were ice cold and stained with grease. I brought them to my lips and kissed her knuckles. "It is just us now, Mom. It is just Jimmy." "Jimmy," she repeated the name anchoring her. She looked at me, and for the first time in days I saw a flicker of the real Elena in her eyes. "You came back." "I promised I would," I said. I stood up and scooped her into my arms. She weighed nothing. She was like a bundle of dry sticks. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small and fearful. "To the shed." "No," I said firmly, walking toward the front door. "Never the shed. We are going to the hospital, the best one in the city. They are going to give you a warm bed and good food, and they are going to make the pain stop." "But the rug," she murmured, looking back at the mess. "The turkey." "Forget the rug," I said, kicking the broken door open with my foot. "I will buy a new one. I will buy 1,000 new ones." I walked out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The flashing lights of the police cars were fading into the distance as they hauled my sister and her husband to jail. I carried my mother down the driveway, past the stone wall, past the iron gate. I did not look back at the house. It was just a building. It was a crime scene. I placed her gently in the passenger seat of my rental car and buckled her in. She looked at me, confused, but safe. "Jimmy?" she asked. "Yeah, Mom. Are you staying?" I started the engine. "I am never leaving you again, Mom. I swear on my life." I drove away from the house I had bought with my blood, leaving the ghosts behind. The war was over. But as I looked at my mother's shaking hands, resting in her lap, I knew the battle to heal her was just beginning. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room hummed with a low, monotonous buzz that seemed to drill directly into my skull. It was 3 in the morning. Outside, the city of Seattle slept. But inside room 402 at Swedish Medical Center, the nightmare was just beginning to reveal its true shape. I sat in a hard plastic chair next to the bed, holding my mother's hand. Her hand felt terrifyingly fragile, like a bundle of dry twigs, wrapped in parchment paper. The doctors had scrubbed the grease and grime from her skin, but they could not scrub away the damage. Without the dirt, she looked even paler, almost translucent against the white hospital sheets. Dr. Aris, a specialist in geriatric care, had pulled me into the hallway an hour earlier. He was a stern man with tired eyes, and he did not mince words. "We have stabilized her," he had said, looking at his clipboard with a frown. "But the toxicology report is alarming. She has a lethal level of sedatives in her system, specifically drugs used to treat severe schizophrenia and bipolar mania. These drugs are muscle relaxants and cognitive suppressants. For a woman of her age and weight, receiving these doses daily is essentially chemical lobotomy." I had clenched my jaw so hard I thought a tooth might crack. "And the weight? She weighs 82 pounds, James," Dr. Aris said quietly. "She is severely malnourished. She has vitamin deficiencies that we usually only see in famine victims. Scurvy. Anemia. Her body has been consuming its own muscle tissue just to keep her heart beating. If you had arrived a week later, we would not be having this conversation. We would be signing a death certificate." Now, sitting beside her, I watched the IV drip clear fluids into her arm. Nutrient solution. Saline. Life. She stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a small, whimpering sound. The heavy sedation was finally wearing off, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve of consciousness. "Jimmy," she croaked. Her voice was like sandpaper. "I am here, Mom," I said, leaning in close, brushing a strand of white hair off her forehead. "I am right here." She blinked her eyes, focusing slowly on the ceiling tiles, then on my face. The terror I had seen in the shed was gone, replaced by a deep, crushing sorrow. She looked at the clean room, the television on the wall, the window overlooking the city lights. "They are angry," she whispered. "Sarah. She was so angry about the turkey." "It does not matter," I said firmly. "Sarah is not here. Kevin is not here. They can never be angry at you again." She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Tears began to leak from the corners of her eyes, sliding down into her ears. "It was not always like this," she said, her voice trembling. "At first, they were so nice. When you left, when you went to the ocean, they brought me flowers. Kevin said I deserved a rest. He said the bills were too complicated for me. He said, 'Let us handle the money, Elena. You just relax.' I closed my eyes, listening to the anatomy of the trap. "Then what happened?" I asked gently. "Then my phone broke," she said. "Or Sarah said it broke. She took it to fix it. She never brought it back. She said no one was calling me anyway. She said you were busy. She said you did not want to be disturbed by an old woman." A lump formed in my throat. I had called. I had emailed. I had sent letters. They had intercepted everything. "Then the accident started," she continued, staring at the IV tube. "I would lose things, my keys, my purse. But I did not lose them, Jimmy, I swear. I would put them on the table, and 5 minutes later they were gone. Kevin would find them in the trash or the fridge. They told me I was losing my mind. They brought that doctor. He gave me the pills. He said they would help me think clearly." She began to sob, her chest heaving under the thin blanket. "The pills made it dark," she cried. "They made my legs heavy. I could not walk straight. I dropped things. Sarah said I was a mess. She said I was disgusting. She moved me to the shed because she said I smelled bad. I just wanted to be good Jimmy. I just wanted to be a good mother so she would love me again." I buried my face in the mattress, letting my own tears fall. It was not dementia. It was gaslighting. It was systematic, calculated psychological torture, designed to break her spirit so they could steal her fortune. I am going to destroy them, I vowed into the sheets. I am going to make sure they die in prison. The next morning brought a gray, weeping sky and an unwanted visitor. I was peeling an orange for my mother when the door opened. I expected a nurse. Instead, I saw Sarah. She was not wearing handcuffs. She was wearing a modest black dress, no makeup, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired, pale, and small. Behind her stood Kevin, looking equally disheveled, his jaw bruised and swollen where I had punched him. I stood up slowly, the fruit knife still in my hand. "How the hell are you here?" I growled, stepping between them and the bed. "Bail," Kevin mumbled, his voice thick because of his injury. "First offense, we posted bond." "Get out," I said, pointing the knife at the door. "If you take one more step, I will finish what I started last night." Sarah ignored me. She did not look at me. She looked past me, straight at our mother. "Mommy," Sarah wailed. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She threw herself onto her knees at the foot of the bed, burying her face in the blanket. She began to sob loud, heaving theatrical sobs that shook her entire body. "Mommy, I am so sorry," Sarah cried. "Please, you have to believe me." We were drowning. We did not know what to do. "Get up, Sarah," I snapped. "Stop acting." "It is not an act," Sarah screamed, turning her tear-streaked face to me. "You do not know what it is like, James. You left. You went to make your millions under the sea, and you left us here. Kevin made bad investments. We lost everything. The loan sharks were threatening to kill us. We borrowed the money from the house thinking we could pay it back." "So you starved your mother to pay a bookie," I spat. "You drugged her so you could buy a Land Rover." "We were scared." Sarah sobbed, turning back to Mom. "Mommy, remember when I was little? Remember when I broke Mrs. Watson's window, and you hid me so Dad would not whip me? You always protected me. You always said I was your baby girl. Please, Mommy, they want to send me to prison. They want to put me in a cage for 20 years. I will die in there." Kevin stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Elena, I promise I will work. I will take any job. I will pay back every cent. Just please tell James to drop the charges. We cannot go to jail. We are family." I looked at them with pure disgust. They were not sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They were weaponizing their own failure to manipulate the victim. "I am not dropping anything," I said cold. "I have the video. I have the records. You are going to rot." "Mommy, please," Sarah shrieked, grabbing Mom's foot through the blanket. "Do not let him do this. He hates me. He has always been jealous because you loved me more. Save me, Mommy." "James!" The voice was weak, but it cut through the room like a command. I turned to look at my mother. She was sitting up, tears streaming down her face. She was looking at Sarah not with anger, but with an agonizing, heartbreaking pity. "James," she said again, "stop." "Mom, do not listen to them," I said desperately. "They are monsters. They tortured you." "She is my daughter," Mom whispered. "She is a criminal," I argued. "She is my baby," Mom said, her voice breaking. "I remember holding her when she was born. I remember braiding her hair. James, I cannot let my child go to prison. I cannot live knowing she is in a cage. It would kill me." "Mom, they deserve it. Maybe," she said, looking at me with pleading eyes. "But if you send her to prison, you are punishing me too. I will worry every day. I will cry every night." "My heart will not take it, Jimmy. Please, for me. Let it go." I stared at her. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. This was the cruelty of a mother's love. It was unconditional, even when it shouldn't be. Even after the starvation, the drugs, the shed, she still saw the little girl in pigtails, not the woman who had slapped her face. I looked at Sarah. She was watching Mom with greedy, hopeful eyes. She knew she had won. She knew exactly which buttons to press. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake my mother and make her see reason. But I looked at the heart monitor. Her pulse was spiking. Her face was flushing. The stress of this confrontation was physically hurting her. If I forced this, if I dragged them to court, my mother would have to testify. She would have to relive the trauma. She would have to watch her daughter be handcuffed and led away in chains. It might actually kill her. I took a deep breath. It tasted like defeat. "Fine," I said. The word felt like ash in my mouth. Sarah let out a gasp of relief. "Oh, thank you, Mommy, thank you." "Shut up," I snapped. I walked over to the bedside table and grabbed a notepad and a pen. I wrote furiously, my hand shaking with suppressed rage. "Here are the terms," I said, ripping the page off and shoving it into Kevin's chest. 1, I listed, ticking them off on my fingers. "You vacate the house immediately. Today, within 2 hours. You take only your personal clothes, no furniture, no electronics, no jewelry bought with my money." 2, I continued. "You sign a confession admitting to the fraud and transferring the deed back to my name fully. You admit the debt, $300,000. You will sign a promissory note. You will pay me back every single month for the rest of your miserable lives. If you miss one payment, I reinstate the criminal charges." 3, I said, leaning into Sarah's face until she flinched. "You never come near us again. You do not call. You do not write. You are dead to us. If I see your face within 1 mile of my mother, I will forget about the law and I will handle you myself." "We agree," Kevin said instantly, pulling a pen from his pocket. "Where do we sign?" They did not even read it. They just wanted to escape the cage. They signed the paper with trembling hands. Sarah hugged Mom one last time, a quick fake squeeze, and whispered, "I love you, Mommy," before sprinting out the door as if the hounds of hell were snapping at her heels. Kevin followed her, clutching the paper, not looking back. The door closed. The room was silent again. I looked at the signed paper. It was a victory, technically. I had the house back. I had the debt acknowledged. But it felt like a loss. Justice had been traded for peace. "Thank you, Jimmy," Mom whispered, sinking back into the pillows. "You are a good boy." I sat down and held her hand. "I hope I did the right thing, Mom." "You did," she said, closing her eyes. "Forgiveness is for us, not for them." 2 days later, I drove her home. The house was empty. Sarah and Kevin had cleared out with impressive speed. The silence in the hallway was heavy. The white marble floors still looked cold, and the smell of Kevin's cologne still lingered faintly in the curtains, ghosting the air. I carried Mom into the living room. She looked around, shrinking slightly, expecting to be shouted at. "It is okay," I said, setting her down on the white leather sofa. "It is just us." I spent the afternoon trying to erase them. I took down the abstract metal art and threw it in the trash. I ripped up the white rug where the turkey had fallen. I opened every window to let the damp Seattle air blow out the smell of greed. I brought Mom to her old room, the master bedroom on the second floor. Sarah had been sleeping in it, of course. I stripped the bed, throwing the silk sheets into the hallway. I brought up the old quilt Mom used to love, the one with the patchwork stars that I'd found stuffed in a closet. "We will paint the walls," I told her, tucking her in. "Cream, like you like. We will plant roses in the spring. We will get a new dining table, a round one made of wood." Mom smiled, but it was a tired, fragile smile. She looked small in the big bed. "That sounds nice, Jimmy," she said. "A fresh start." I sat in the chair by the window as she fell asleep. I looked out at the front yard. The rain was falling again, washing the driveway clean. It should have felt like a happy ending. The villains were gone. The hero had returned. The castle was reclaimed. But as I watched the chest of my sleeping mother rise and fall, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It had been too easy. Sarah and Kevin were narcissists. They were parasites. Parasites do not just detach and crawl away because you ask them to. They feed until the host is dry. They had signed that paper too quickly. They had accepted the debt too easily. I looked at my phone. I had not heard from the bank yet about the deed transfer. It was the weekend, so the offices were closed. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that fear was just a residual side effect of the deep-sea pressure. I was wrong. I did not know it then, but the storm had not passed. We were just in the eye of the hurricane, and the wind was about to change direction. The week that followed was a cruel, beautiful lie. It was a week of quiet breakfasts, where I watched the color slowly return to my mother's cheeks. It was a week of smelling fresh paint instead of stale medicine. I had hired a local crew to strip the gray paint from the exterior, peeling away the prison colors to reveal the warm cream wood underneath. I spent my days sanding down the banisters and my evenings reading to Mom by the fireplace. For 7 days, I allowed myself to be James Miller the son. I forgot about James Miller, the deep-sea diver who survived in hostile environments. I let my guard down. I believed that the victory was won. I believed that a signed piece of paper and a tearful apology were enough to bind monsters. I was naive. I had forgotten the first rule of the ocean. Just because the water looks calm does not mean the shark has left the area. It just means he is swimming deep, waiting for you to look away. On Tuesday morning, I woke up with a light heart. Today was the day I would go to the county clerk's office to file the revocation of the power of attorney and formally record the deed transfer back into my name. It was a formality, really. The papers were signed. The war was over. I kissed Mom on the forehead as she sat in the kitchen drinking tea and watching the birds in the garden. I will be back by noon, I promised. We can go look for that new dining table. She smiled, a genuine soft smile. Drive safe, Jimmy. I drove downtown listening to the radio, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. I parked the rental car and walked into the grand echoing hall of the records division. I pulled a ticket and waited. When my number was called, I walked up to the glass partition, sliding the folder of documents across the counter to a woman named Brenda. I need to record a deed transfer and a revocation of power of attorney, I said, smiling. Brenda adjusted her glasses and began typing into her computer. Address, 14 Oakwood Drive, she typed. She frowned. She stopped typing and squinted at the screen. Then, she typed again, harder this time, as if the keyboard were lying to her. Sir, she said, looking up at me with a confused expression. There must be a mistake with your paperwork. No mistake, I said. My sister signed it 3 days ago. Well, Brenda said, turning the monitor so I could see it. According to the system, this property was sold yesterday afternoon. The title transfer was recorded electronically at 4:55 p.m. The world stopped. The noise of the busy office faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. What did you say? I asked, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. The property was sold, she repeated. Grantor Elena Miller via power of attorney Sarah Miller. Grantee Quick Cash Home Solutions, LLC. Sale price $800,000. I stared at the screen. $800,000. The house was worth $1.5 million. They had sold it for half its value. They had sold it for a quick cash only, no inspection liquidation. That is impossible, I stammered, gripping the counter. I have the revocation right here. She signed it? But you did not file it, sir, Brenda said gently. Until you file it, the previous power of attorney is still valid in the system. And since you dropped the lawsuit, the Elias pendants blocking the sale was removed. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. I had dropped the lawsuit. I had removed the legal block on the property because my mother had begged me to save her daughter from prison. And in that window of time, that 1 week of mercy, Sarah had not been packing her bags. She had been shopping the house to every predatory real estate flipper in the state. Sir, Brenda called out. I did not answer. I turned and ran. I sprinted out of the courthouse, ignoring the security guard shouting at me to walk. I vaulted into my car and slammed the accelerator to the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely steer. I wove through traffic, running red lights, honking my horn at pedestrians. The 30-minute drive took me 12. I turned the corner onto Oakwood Drive. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a sledgehammer. Please let it be a mistake, I prayed. Please let it be a clerical error. Then I saw it. Stuck into the soft, rain-soaked earth of the front lawn was a sign. It was bright yellow and red, aggressive and ugly. Sold. Quick Cash Home Solutions. We buy houses in 24 hours. And then I saw the trucks. 2 large, unmarked box trucks were parked in the driveway. A group of 4 men in blue coveralls were moving in and out of the front door. They were not moving furniture in. They were throwing things out. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I screeched to a halt, curbing the car, and jumped out. "Hey!" I screamed, running up the driveway. "What are you doing? Get away from my house!" One of the men, a burly guy with a shaved head, walked out the front door, carrying a rocking chair. My mother's rocking chair. He swung it casually and tossed it onto the wet grass, like it was garbage. "Put that down!" I roared, lunging at him. "Whoa, buddy!" The man stepped back, dropping the chair. It landed with a crack. "Back off private property." "I am the owner," I shouted, my fists clenched. "Get the hell off my land." "You are not the owner, pal." A man in a cheap, shiny gray suit stepped out of the garage. He was holding a clipboard and chewing on a toothpick. He looked me up and down with the bored indifference of a man who evicted people for a living. "You, James Miller?" the suit asked. "Yes, I am James Miller. And you are trespassing." "Name is Rick," the man said, not offering his hand. "I represent Quick Cash Solutions. We bought this property yesterday. Closed the deal, transferred the funds. Title is clear. We are just clearing out the junk left by the previous occupant, so we can demo the interior." "Junk," I choked out. "That is my mother's furniture." "It is abandoned property," Rick said, tapping his clipboard. "Contract states the house was sold as is, empty possession. Anything left inside belongs to us. We are doing you a favor by putting it on the lawn instead of the dumpster." "My mother is inside," I yelled. "Where is she?" "The old lady." Rick jerked his thumb toward the backyard. "She was screaming. My guys had to escort her out. Safety regulations. Can't have civilians in a work zone." I pushed past him, running around the side of the house to the backyard. My mother was standing in the rain, near the empty swimming pool. She was clutching her chest, her mouth open in a silent scream. She was staring at a pile of clothes that had been dumped on the patio stones. Her clothes. Her sweaters, her dresses, the quilt I had just put on her bed. They were soaking up the muddy water. "Mom!" I ran to her. She collapsed before I could reach her. She hit the wet concrete hard. I slid onto my knees, skidding on the slick surface, and scooped her up. She was hyperventilating, her eyes rolling back in her head. "Jimmy," she gasped, clutching my lapel. "They are taking it. They are taking the house. Why, we signed the paper. Sarah promised." "She lied, Mom," I said, my voice breaking. "She lied about everything." I looked up. Rick, the suit guy, had followed me. He was standing under the awning, staying dry, while we knelt in the rain. "Look," Rick said, checking his watch. "I do not want to be a jerk, but we have a schedule. This place is getting gutted tomorrow. You have got 24 hours to get your stuff and get off the property. After that, I am calling the sheriff to have you removed for trespassing." "You bought a stolen house," I shouted at him. "My sister stole it. The deed transfer is fraudulent." "Take it up with your sister," Rick said with a shrug. "Paperwork looked clean to me. We paid $800,000 cash. It is a done deal. Legally, this is my dirt you are sitting on. $800,000. plus the $500,000 from the loan. $1.3 million. Sarah and Kevin had walked away with over $1 million of my money. And they had done it while crying on the floor of a hospital room, begging for mercy. I fumbled for my phone. My hands were wet and shaking. I dialed Sarah's number. It did not ring. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. I dialed Kevin. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. I dialed the hospital where they had claimed to be staying for a follow-up treatment. I am sorry, Mr. Miller, the receptionist said. Mrs. Miller and her husband checked out early yesterday morning against medical advice. They left no forwarding address. I lowered the phone. They were gone. They had planned this. Every second of it. The tears in the hospital room, the confession, the signing of the promissory note. It was all a stall tactic. They knew I would drop the criminal charges if I thought they were cooperating. They knew that dropping the charges would lift the Ellis Pendens, the only legal red flag that stopped a sale. They had used my mother's love as a weapon. They had used my own mercy as a smokescreen. While I was painting the walls and making soup, they were frantically calling We Buy Houses companies, looking for the fastest cash offer. They took a massive loss on the property value just to get the money and run before I could file the revocation. It was not just theft. It was a surgical strike. It was a knife in the back, twisted by the hand of the person you tried to save. Jimmy! Mom wept, her body shaking violently in my arms. I caused this. I stopped you. I told you to let them go. I did this. No, Mom, I said, but the words felt hollow. I did, she wailed, a sound of pure shattered heartbreak. I trusted her. She is my daughter. How could she do this to me again? She buried her face in my chest, sobbing with the kind of grief that breaks bones. The grief of a mother who realizes that her child is not just flawed but evil. I looked up at the house I had worked 5 years to buy, the house that was supposed to be her sanctuary. Strangers were inside laughing, ripping down the curtains. Rick, the property guy, tossed a cardboard box onto the patio. Better get packing, buddy. Clock is ticking. Something inside me died in that moment. The part of me that wanted to be a civilian, the part of me that wanted to believe in rehabilitation and family bonds, it died. It drowned in the cold Seattle rain. I looked at my mother, broken and homeless on the stones. I looked at the smug man in the suit. I looked at the red "Sold" sign. The sadness evaporated. The shock evaporated. What was left was a cold, hard clarity. It was the same clarity I felt at 300 feet below sea level, when the darkness was total, and the pressure was enough to crush a submarine. I was no longer James the son. I was James the diver. And I had just identified the leak. I gently brushed the wet hair from my mother's face. It is okay, Mom, I said. My voice is different now. It was devoid of emotion. It was flat, mechanical, and terrifyingly calm. We are going to leave. Where? She sobbed. Somewhere safe, I said. And then I am going to find them. Jimmy, no, she whispered, sensing the shift in me. Let them go. They have the money. They are gone. They are not gone, I said, standing up and lifting her effortlessly into my arms. They are just running, and there is nowhere on this earth they can run where I will not find them. I carried her to the car, ignoring the workers, ignoring the rain, ignoring the ruin of our lives scattered on the lawn. I did not look back at the house. It was just wood and stone. It was lost. But the war had just escalated. They had taken the money. They had taken the house, but they had made a fatal error. They had left me alive, and they had left me with nothing to lose. I put the car in gear. I did not drive to a hotel. I drove to the one place where I knew I could find a ghost. I drove to Mike's office. This was no longer a legal dispute. This was a hunt. I drove my mother to a small, quiet apartment in the Queen Anne district. It belonged to Dave, an old diving buddy of mine who was currently working a contract in the Gulf of Mexico. He had given me the keys years ago, telling me to use it whenever I was on shore leave. It was not a mansion. It had creaky floorboards and the radiator hissed like an angry cat, but it was warm, dry, and most importantly, it was secret. I set Mom up in the guest bedroom. I made her tea. I turned on the television to a channel that played old black and white movies, the kind she liked. She was numb. She sat in the armchair staring at the screen, clutching the hem of her sleeve. She had stopped crying. The tears had been replaced by a hollow, thousand-yard stare that I recognized from men who had seen too much darkness at the bottom of the sea. "I will be back," I told her, kneeling beside the chair. "I have to go finish this." "Be careful, Jimmy," she whispered, not looking away from the screen. "They are dangerous." "So am I," said. I locked the door from the outside. I called a private security firm, another contact from my military days, and hired an armed guard to sit in the lobby of the building, 24/7. Nobody was getting near Elena Miller again. Then I went to war. I met Mike at his office. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the hum of computer servers. Mike looked tired, but his eyes were alive with the thrill of the chase. Next to him sat a woman in a sharp gray suit. Agent Reynolds from the FBI. "James," Mike said, gesturing to the agent. "We have upgraded the playing field." "Wire fraud," Agent Reynolds said, her voice crisp and professional. "Bank fraud. Identity theft involving a senior citizen. When your sister and her husband sold that house, they transferred the funds through an interstate wire. That makes it a federal crime. And since the amount exceeds $1 million, including the loans, we are looking at mandatory prison time. Decades, not years." "Where are they?" I asked. "They made a mistake," Mike said, spinning his monitor around. "They were smart enough to ditch their smartphones. They were smart enough to buy a burner phone. But Kevin is a creature of habit, and Kevin is an addict." Mike pointed to a credit card transaction on the screen. "He used an old Discover card, one he thought was maxed out, and forgotten to pay for in-flight Wi-Fi on a Delta flight yesterday afternoon." "Where did they go?" "They tried to book a flight to Mexico City," Mike explained. "But their passports were flagged in the system from the initial lawsuit I filed. The airline system kicked back the international booking, so they panicked. They needed somewhere they could disappear, somewhere they could spend cash easily, and somewhere that felt like a victory lap." "Las Vegas," I said. "Bingo," Mike said. "They landed at Harry Reid International last night. They rented a convertible Mustang, paid in cash, and checked into the Bellagio. They are in the chairman's suite." "The chairman's suite," I repeated, my blood turning to ice. "They are living like kings on my mother's starvation." "We are coordinating with the Las Vegas field office," Agent Reynolds said. "We can have a team there in 4 hours." "I am going," I said. "Mr. Miller, that is not necessary," Reynolds started. "It is necessary," I cut her off. "I am the one who let them go. I am the one who dropped the charges. I need to be there when the cuffs go on. I need them to see me." I did not wait for permission. I walked out. I did not fly. I did not want to be trapped in a metal tube waiting on schedules. I needed to move. I drove my rental car like a man possessed. I pushed the engine to its limit, tearing down Interstate 5, cutting through Oregon, down through the spine of California, and cutting across the Mojave Desert. I drove for 15 hours straight. I stopped only for gas and black coffee. I did not feel fatigue. I was fueled by a rage so pure it felt like a drug. Every mile marker was a countdown. Every hour that passed was another $1,000 of my mother's life. They were burning at a roulette table. I hit the Las Vegas Strip just as the sun was setting. The neon lights flickered to life, a gaudy artificial canyon of greed. To most people, this place was a playground. To me tonight, it looked like a trap. I pulled up to the Bellagio. I tossed the keys to the valet and walked straight to the security office. Agent Reynolds had called ahead. The head of casino security, a massive man named Tanaka, was waiting for me. "Mr. Miller," Tanaka said, shaking my hand. "The FBI is en route. They are 10 minutes out. But you might want to see this." He led me into the surveillance room. A wall of monitors displayed every inch of the casino floor. Tanaka typed a code into the console, and one of the screens zoomed in. There they were. Kevin was at a high-stakes roulette table. He was wearing a tuxedo that was slightly too tight. He had a cigar clamped between his teeth and a drink in his hand. He was laughing, high-fiving the stranger next to him. I looked at the stack of chips in front of him. It was a tower. "He is betting $10,000 on a single spin," Tanaka said quietly. "He is down about $200,000 since last night." $200,000. That was the price of the house I wanted to buy Mom in the countryside. Gone. In 24 hours. "Where is Sarah?" I asked. Tanaka switched cameras. Sarah was in the high-end retail promenade inside the hotel. She was standing at the counter of a jewelry store. She was wearing a sequined dress that looked like it cost more than a car. She was pointing at a diamond necklace. The clerk was nodding, pulling out a velvet tray. She was smiling. It was not a nervous smile. It was a smile of pure, unburdened entitlement. She looked like she had not a care in the world. She had forgotten the hospital room. She had forgotten her mother sobbing on the wet concrete. She was buying diamonds with the money she got from selling her mother's sanctuary. "They are disgusting," I whispered. "We have agents moving into position," Tanaka said, listening to his earpiece. "We are going to take them in the room. We do not want a scene on the casino floor. It is bad for business. We wait for them to go upstairs." We waited. It took an hour. An hour of watching Kevin lose another $50,000. An hour of watching Sarah buy 3 Louis Vuitton bags. Finally, they met up near the elevators. They looked drunk. They were stumbling, laughing, holding each other up. Kevin slapped Sarah on the rear end and she giggled. They looked like 2 teenagers who had stolen their parents' credit card. They got into the elevator. "Let's go," I said. I rode up in the service elevator with Tanaka, 2 uniformed Las Vegas police officers, and 4 FBI agents who had just arrived. The elevator smelled of industrial cleaner. No one spoke. We checked our weapons. I did not have a gun, but my fists were clenched so tight, my fingernails were cutting into my palms. We reached the top floor. The hallway was silent, lined with thick plush carpet that swallowed the sound of our footsteps. We stopped outside the double doors of the chairman's suite. I could hear music thumping from inside. They were having a party for 2. "Keycard," the lead FBI agent whispered. Tanaka swiped the master key. The light turned green. The agent held up 3 fingers. 2. 1. They breached the door. Federal agents, police hands in the air. The room was an explosion of chaos. The agents poured in, weapons drawn. I walked in behind them. The suite was a wreck. There were bottles of Dom Perignon champagne, everywhere half-eaten trays of lobster and caviar scattered on the floor. Clothes, expensive, brand-new clothes, were thrown over every piece of furniture. Kevin was standing near the balcony, holding a bottle of champagne. He froze. His face went slack. The cigar fell from his mouth and burned a hole in the carpet. "Get on the ground now!" an officer screamed. Kevin did not fight. He did not run. He collapsed. He dropped to his knees and curled into a ball, putting his hands over his head, sobbing instantly. The tough guy, the high roller, the man who threw juice in an old woman's face, he melted into a puddle of cowardice. The second real authority walked through the door. "Where is the female?" the agent shouted. I heard the sound of a toilet flushing. "Bathroom!" I yelled. I ran toward the master bathroom. The door was locked. I did not wait for the ram. I kicked it. The lock shattered. Sarah was standing over the toilet. She was frantically tearing open a velvet jewelry box. A diamond necklace, the one I had seen on the screen, was dangling from her hand. She dropped it into the bowl, and reached for the handle again. I grabbed her wrist. "No, you do not," I snarled. She screamed, a feral animal sound. She tried to bite me. She clawed at my face with her manicured nails. "Let me go," she shrieked. "It is mine. It is all mine." "It never was," I said, twisting her arm behind her back. I slammed her against the marble vanity, avoiding the mirror. The necklace slid into the water, but the flush cycle had finished. It sat there, glittering at the bottom of the bowl. "Secure her!" I shouted. 2 agents rushed in, pulling her off me. They slammed the cuffs on her wrists. "You cannot do this," Sarah was screaming, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "I have rights. I am a victim. He is hurting me." I stood back, breathing hard. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was wearing a dress that cost $5,000, but she looked like trash. Her eyes were wild, darting around the room, looking for an escape that did not exist. "James," she yelled when she saw me. "James, tell them." "Tell them it is a misunderstanding. We were going to pay you back. We just came here to try to double the money, for Mom. We were doing it for Mom." I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. "You were gambling with her life," I said, my voice dead calm. "And you lost." I walked out of the bathroom. In the main room, Kevin was cuffed and face down on the carpet. An agent was pulling a suitcase out from under the bed. He unzipped it. It was packed tight with stacks of $100 bills, the cash from the house sale. "We have the money," the agent said. "Most of it anyway." I looked at Kevin. He lifted his head. His nose was running, and he was weeping like a child. "James, please," he blubbered. "I have a gambling problem. It is a disease. You have to help me. We are brothers." I walked over to him. I squatted down so my face was inches from his. "I am not your brother," I whispered. "I am the landlord, and your lease has just been terminated." I stood up. "Get them out of here!" The police hauled them up. They dragged them out of the suite, past the overturned lobster trays and the spilled champagne. Sarah was still screaming threats and pleas. Kevin was dead weight, his legs dragging on the carpet. I watched them go. I watched the elevator doors close on their faces. I turned back to the room. It smelled of stale alcohol and greed. I looked at the suitcase full of money. It was just paper. It was dirty paper. I walked out onto the balcony. The Las Vegas Strip stretched out below me, a river of light in the desert darkness. It was beautiful, and it was fake, just like them. I pulled my phone out. I dialed Dave's apartment. "Hello." My mother's voice was small, fearful. "Mom," I said, "it is over. Did you find them?" "I found them," I said. "They are in custody. We have the money. We have everything." There was a long silence on the other end. "Are you okay, Jimmy?" she asked. I looked at my hand. It was shaking slightly. "I am fine, Mom," I lied. "I am coming home." I hung up. I was not fine. I felt empty. I had hunted the sharks, and I had caught them. But as I looked down at the city of sin, I realized that the ocean I was swimming in was darker than I had ever imagined. And I was not sure I could ever wash the salt off my skin. 3 months passed between the night in Las Vegas and the day we walked into the King County Superior Court. It was a season of gray skies and slow healing. I had spent those 90 days trying to put weight back on my mother's frame, feeding her soups and protein shakes, and watching her slowly learn to trust that the refrigerator would not be locked. But while her body was mending, her eyes often drifted to the window, looking for a car that would never come haunted by a ghost who was still alive. The courtroom was a cavernous space of mahogany and cold recycled air. It smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I sat in the front row, my suit feeling tight across my shoulders. Beside me, my mother sat in her wheelchair. She did not need it to walk anymore, but Dr. Aris had suggested it to conserve her energy for the ordeal ahead. She was wearing a blue dress the color of the ocean I had left behind, and her white hair was neatly combed. She looked dignified, but I could feel the tremor in her hand as she gripped mine. The bailiff called the court to order. When the side door opened, the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah and Kevin were let in. They were not wearing their designer suits or sequined dresses today. They were dressed in orange jumpsuits that hung loosely on their bodies. They were shackled at the wrists and ankles, the chains clinking with a heavy metallic rhythm that echoed off the high ceiling. Kevin looked terrible. He had lost weight. His skin was sallow and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped rat. He refused to look at the gallery. Sarah, however, looked straight at us. Her hair was limp, her face scrubbed of makeup revealing the hardness of her features. But her eyes were not fearful. They were cold. She looked at our mother not with remorse but with a terrifying intensity, as if she were trying to telepathically force her into submission one last time. The trial began. It was not the dramatic shouting match you see in movies. It was a slow, methodical dissection of a tragedy. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Caldwell, laid out the facts: the wire fraud, the identity theft, the physical abuse, the theft of over $1 million in assets. Then, it was the defense's turn. Sarah's lawyer was a man with a slippery voice and an expensive haircut. He did not deny the actions. He tried to reframe the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, pacing in front of the box, "you have heard about the money. You have heard about the condition of Mrs. Miller. But you have not heard the context. My client, Sarah Miller, was a young woman drowning in responsibility. 5 years ago, her brother, the man sitting right there, abandoned this family. He fled to the other side of the world to pursue a lucrative career, leaving his aging mother solely in the care of his younger sister." I clenched my jaw, my knuckles turning white. "Sarah Miller did not set out to harm her mother," the lawyer continued, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "She was overwhelmed. She was dealing with a mother who was becoming difficult, perhaps even violent, due to undiagnosed cognitive decline. The decisions made, the separate living quarters, the medication were desperate attempts to manage a chaotic household. The financial transfers, compensation for 5 years of unpaid 24-hour care. This is not a crime of malice. This is a tragedy of caregiver burnout." It was a sickening, brilliant lie. He was turning the abuser into the victim. I saw some of the jurors nodding sympathetically. They knew how hard it was to care for the elderly. They were buying it. Ms. Caldwell stood up. "The prosecution calls James Miller to the stand." I walked to the witness box. I swore the oath. I looked at Sarah. She smirked at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible curling of her lip. She thought she had won. She thought the poor, overwhelmed daughter's story would save her. "Mr. Miller," Ms. Caldwell said, "the defense claims your sister was simply an exhausted caregiver doing her best. Do you have any evidence to the contrary?" "I do," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket. I did not pull out a flash drive or a bank statement. I pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was a stack of crumpled, dirty paper. "What is this?" Ms. Caldwell asked. "When I was cleaning out the shed, the place they forced my mother to live, I found a loose floorboard under the mattress," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "Underneath it I found these. They are wrappers, butcher paper, receipts, anything my mother could scavenge from the trash." I turned to the jury. "My mother was not allowed to have paper or pens. She stole a pencil stub from Kevin's golf bag, and she wrote." "Please read the entry dated November 14th, Ms. Caldwell said. I opened the bag carefully. The paper crinkled in the silence. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, the script of a woman whose hands were swollen with arthritis and cold. "November 14th, I read, my voice wavering slightly. "I am so hungry today. Kevin threw the sandwich in the dirt because I looked at him wrong. I ate it anyway when he left. Miss Sarah came in later. She told me I am a burden. She told me Jimmy is never coming back because he hates me. She laughed when I cried. She said if I sign the paper, I can have a blanket. I am so cold. I just want to sleep and not wake up. A gasp went through the jury box. One juror, an older woman in the front row, covered her mouth with her hand. I picked up another scrap. December 2nd. The medicine makes my head float. I cannot remember my father's face. I asked Sarah for water. She told me to drink from the hose. I think I am dying. Please God, let Jimmy come home. Do not let me die in the dark. I looked up. Sarah's smirk was gone. She was staring at the table, her face pale. This was not caregiver burnout, I said, staring directly at the defense attorney. This was a hostage situation, and the hostage was my mother. Ms. Caldwell called her next witness. Dr. Eris. The doctor walked to the stand with the gravity of a man who dealt in hard truths. He projected the brain scans of my mother onto the large screen. This, Dr. Eris said, pointing to a laser pointer at the dark patches on the gray image, is the brain of Elena Miller. These areas of atrophy in the frontal lobe are not natural aging. They are the result of chronic high-dose exposure to neuroleptic drugs that were never prescribed for her. Specifically, haloperidol and clozapine. What is the effect of these drugs on a healthy brain? Ms. Caldwell asked. It is catastrophic, Dr. Eris stated. They suppress cognitive function. They induce motor control failure. In layman's terms, they chemically induce the symptoms of dementia. Sarah Miller and her husband were not managing a disease. They were manufacturing one. And I must state for the record, the damage is permanent. Mrs. Miller has recovered some function, but parts of her memory and cognitive processing speed are gone forever. They stole years of her life that can never be returned. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. The defense attorney looked down at his notes, realizing his burnout theory had just been incinerated by forensic science. The prosecution calls Elena Miller. My mother wheeled herself to the stand. The bailiff offered to help, but she shook her head. She stood up. It was slow, and her legs shook, but she stood. She walked the 3 steps to the witness chair and sat down. Ms. Caldwell looked at her gently. Mrs. Miller, is there anything you would like to say to the defendants? My mother turned. She looked at Kevin, who was weeping silently, into his hands. Then she looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back. For a second, I saw the old manipulation kick in. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She mouthed the word mommy. She gave a trembling, pathetic look, the look of a child who had scraped her knee. It was the look that had worked in the hospital. It was the look that had saved her from jail 3 months ago. My mother stared at her. She did not blink. She did not smile. I loved you, my mother said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. I loved you more than I loved myself. When your father left, I worked 3 jobs so you could have the pretty dresses. I went without dinner so you could have the meat. I gave you everything. Mommy, I am sorry, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Do not call me that, my mother said. The sharpness in her voice made Sarah flinch. You lost the right to call me that when you threw me in the dirt. You lost the right when you laughed at me while I was hungry. My mother leaned forward, gripping the railing of the witness box. I forgave you in the hospital, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I saved you. I gave you a second chance because I thought there was still a human being inside of you. And you used my love as a weapon. You used my mercy to rob me. You took the house that Jimmy bought with his life. You took it and you ran to a casino to laugh about it. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but my mother cut her off. I have no daughter, my mother declared. The girl I raised died 5 years ago. You are just a stranger who looks like her. You are a thief. You are a monster, and you are the most painful lesson of my life. I hope you live a long time, Sarah. I hope you live long enough to understand what it feels like to be truly alone. My mother sat back. She looked exhausted, but she looked free. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He did not look at the defendants. In the matter of the state, versus Sarah Miller and Kevin Thompson, on the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of elder abuse with aggravating circumstances, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendants guilty. 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 The word rang out like a bell, tolling the end of a long, dark night. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair and eyes like flint, looked at the pair in orange. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years, the judge said, her voice icy. "I have seen murderers, gangs, and drug dealers. But I have rarely seen such a cold-blooded, calculated betrayal of trust as I have seen in this courtroom. You did not just steal from this woman. You tried to erase her humanity." She turned to Kevin. "Kevin Thompson, for your role in the financial fraud and the physical abuse documented on video, I sentence you to 15 years in a state penitentiary. You will be eligible for parole after 12 years. Kevin let out a high-pitched sob, collapsing onto the table. The judge turned to Sarah. "Sarah Miller," the judge said, and her voice dropped an octave. "You were the architect. You were the daughter. You held the power of attorney. The law holds you to a higher standard of duty, and you violated it in the most grotesque way possible. There is no mitigation here. There is no remorse. There is only greed." "No," Sarah whispered. "Please." "I sentence you to 20 years in a state penitentiary," the judge declared. "Due to the aggravating factors of elder abuse and the violation of a fiduciary position, you will not be eligible for early release. You will serve every day of that sentence." The gavel came down. Bang! It was over. The courtroom erupted into movement. The bailiffs moved in to take them away. "No!" Sarah screamed. It was a raw, terrified shriek. She lunged toward the gallery, reaching out with her shackled hands. "Mommy, help me. Do not let them take me, James. James, please, I am your sister." I stood up. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, the fear of the cage, the fear of the loss of control. "I have no sister," I said quietly. The bailiffs grabbed her. She fought them, kicking and screaming, cursing me, cursing Mom, spitting venom until the heavy door slammed shut behind her, cutting off her voice. Kevin was dragged out behind her, his legs, useless, weeping like a broken child. The silence that followed was heavy. I looked down at my mother. She was not looking at the door. She was looking at her hands, the hands that had scrubbed floors for Sarah, the hands that had been frozen in that shed. "It is done, Mom," I said. The judge had also issued a summary judgment voiding the sale of the house. The transaction was fraudulent. The Quick Cash Company would get their property back, but the deed reverted to me. The house was ours again. We walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp and clean. Reporters were waiting at the bottom of the steps, microphones, raised hungry for a quote about the House of Horrors trial. I ignored them. I pushed my mother's wheelchair toward the car, my head held high. We had won. We had the house. We had the money back. The monsters were in cages. But as I lifted my mother into the car, I saw a single tear slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away and tried to smile at me. "Let's go home, Jimmy," she said. I nodded. I drove away, leaving the courthouse behind. But I knew the truth. Justice is a legal concept. It fixes the paperwork, it balances the scales. But it does not fix the heart. My mother had her house back, but she had lost her daughter forever. And I had lost the last shred of innocence I had left. The war was over, but the casualties were sitting right there in the car with me. We stood in the hallway of the house on Oakwood Drive, one last time. The movers had already taken the few pieces of furniture. We decided to keep the old oak chest, the bookshelf, and the rocking chair I had rescued from the lawn that rainy afternoon. The house was empty now. The walls were freshly painted in the cream color my mother loved, and the floors shone under the morning sun. It looked perfect. It looked like the dream home I had imagined while shivering in the diving bell at the bottom of the North Sea. But it did not feel like a dream. It felt like a museum of trauma. My mother stood by the window looking out at the spot in the garden where the shed used to be. I had torn that structure down with my own hands the day after the trial. I had smashed every board and ripped out every rusted nail until there was nothing left but bare earth. But even with the shed gone, the shadow remained. I saw her shiver, even though the heating was set to 70 degrees. "Are you ready, Mom?" I asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. She turned to me. Her eyes were clearer now, the fog of the medication having fully lifted, but there was a sadness in them that I knew would never truly fade. She looked at the white marble floor of the dining room, the spot where she had dropped the turkey, the spot where her own daughter had slapped her. "Yes, Jimmy," she said softly. "I am ready. I cannot breathe in this house. The air, it feels heavy." "I know," I said. "That is why we are leaving." I had officially regained the deed to the house 2 weeks after the trial. The law was on our side. But the victory felt hollow. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I saw the ghost of Kevin throwing juice in her face. Every time I looked at the staircase, I imagined Sarah dragging her by the arm. You cannot build a sanctuary on a graveyard of memories. So I sold it. I did not wait for the market to peak. I did not haggle for the highest offer. I sold it to a young couple with a baby on the way, people who knew nothing of the history, people who would fill these rooms with new innocent laughter. I took the money, every cent of it, and I turned my back on the suburbs of Seattle forever. We drove south. We drove away from the city, away from the noise, away from the high society pretenses that Sarah had coveted so desperate. We drove until the interstate turned into a winding 2-lane highway, flanked by towering Douglas firs on one side and the crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean on the other. We settled in a small town on the coast of Oregon. It is a place where the mist rolls in from the sea every morning, blanketing the world in a soft, cool gray that feels cleansing rather than depressing. It is a place where neighbors do not care about designer handbags or luxury cars. They care about tide charts and firewood. I bought a small farmhouse on 5 acres of land. It is nothing like the Victorian mansion. It is a single-story wooden house with a wide wraparound porch and a tin roof that sings when it rains. It does not have a swimming pool or a smart security system, but it has a view of the ocean that stretches to the horizon, and the air is so fresh it tastes like pine needles and salt. For the first time in 5 years, I unpacked my bags, knowing I would not be packing them again. I made a decision the day we signed the papers for the farm. I called Apex Offshore Solutions. My supervisor, a man named Henderson, was surprised. "Miller, we have a contract waiting for you," he had said. "Double hazard pay. We need you on the rig in the Gulf. You are the best welder we have." "I am retired," I told him. "You are 32. Henderson laughed. "Nobody retires at 32. Think about the money, James. Another 5 years and you will be set for life." "I already spent 5 years thinking about the money," I said, looking at my mother who was sitting on the porch watching the waves. "And it almost cost me everything that actually matters." I hung up the phone. I hung up on the deep sea. I hung up on the darkness. Instead, I used a portion of the house sale money to buy an old rundown garage at the edge of town. I renovated it, painted a sign that said Miller's Auto Repair, and opened for business. I am no longer a saturation diver. I am a mechanic. I fix rusted pickup trucks for fishermen and change oil for tourists passing through on the highway. My hands are still stained with grease, but it is honest grease. And the best part, the shop closes at 5 o'clock. At 5:15 every single day I am home. I walk through the front door and I smell dinner cooking, real food, roast chicken with rosemary, beef stew with carrots from the garden. My mother is there standing at the stove, humming a song I remember from my childhood. She is not wearing a maid's uniform. She is wearing a soft, knitted cardigan and comfortable slippers. Her recovery was not overnight. For the first few weeks, she would panic if I was 5 minutes late. She would hide food in her pockets, a lingering survival instinct from the days of starvation. But slowly, with the rhythm of the tides, she began to heal. The sea air did wonders for her lungs. The color returned to her cheeks, a healthy rosy flush that made her look 10 years younger. She gained weight. Her arms, once skeletal, became soft and strong again. But the biggest sign of her healing was the garden. Sarah had paved over Mom's garden. She had hated the dirt, but here the soil was rich and dark, and I built raised beds for her along the south side of the house. We went to the nursery and bought rose bushes, dozens of them. Now, 6 months later, the farmhouse is surrounded by color. Crimson glory roses, yellow, peace roses, pink, tea roses. My mother spends her mornings out there wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, pruning and watering. She talks to the flowers. She tells them they are beautiful. She nurtures them with the same fierce, gentle love she used to pour into us. I hired a nurse to help out a woman named Mrs. Gable, but this time I vetted her like I was hiring for a special ops mission. Mrs. Gable is a retired widow with a laugh that shakes the windows. She does not wear a uniform. She comes over 3 times a week to play Scrabble with Mom and help her with her physical therapy exercises. I do not leave them alone because I have to. I leave them alone because I trust her. But I still come home for lunch every day, just to check, just to see Mom smile. One evening, I found Mom sitting on the porch, swing a ball of blue yarn in her lap. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of violet and burning orange. The ocean was calm, the waves lapping gently against the shore. She was staring out at the water, her knitting needles silent in her hands. She had a look on her face that I had come to recognize. It was not fear. It was a deep, aching melancholy. I sat down beside her. The swing creaked gently. "You are thinking about her," I said. I did not have to say the name. Mom sighed a sound that seemed to come from the very bottom of her soul. "It is her birthday next week," she whispered. "She will be 29. "She is in prison, Mom," I said gently. "She is paying for what she did." "I know," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I know she is bad, Jimmy. I know she hurt me. I know she is dangerous. But I cannot help remembering the day she was born. She was so small. She had these tiny little fingers." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. "A mother does not stop loving her child just because the child becomes a monster," she said. "I hate what she did, but I miss who she was, or who I thought she was. Is that wrong?" "No," I said, putting my arm around her. "It is not wrong. It just means you are a good person. It means you have a heart that she did not deserve." We sat there in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. I realized then that this was the true scar. The physical wounds had healed. The money had been recovered. But the heartbreak of a mother betrayed by her own daughter was a wound that would never fully close. It was a grief she would carry to her grave. And that was my burden to bear too. I had to be enough for her. I had to be the son who stayed. I had to fill the silence that Sarah had left behind. "I am here, Mom," I said, squeezing her shoulder. "I am not going anywhere." "I know, Jimmy," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I know." That night, after she went to sleep, I walked down to the beach alone. I stood at the water's edge, letting the cold Pacific foam wash over my boots. I looked out at the vast black emptiness of the ocean. 5 years ago, I had looked at that same ocean and seen dollar signs. I had seen a way to save my family. I had thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I just sacrificed enough, if I just sent enough wire transfers, I could build a wall of money that would keep them safe. I was a fool. I realized now that money is not a shield. Money is just a tool, and in the wrong hands it is a weapon. I had sent checks, but I had not sent myself. I had abdicated my role as a protector, thinking that my bank account could take my place. I picked up a stone and threw it into the surf. "Never again," I whispered to the waves. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. You cannot protect the people you love by proxy. You cannot outsource your presence. The only thing that keeps the wolves away is the shepherd standing at the gate. The next morning, Mom and I went for a walk on the beach. It was low tide. The sand was wet and packed hard, perfect for walking. She linked her arm through mine, her steps steady and strong. We walked for a mile, leaving 2 sets of footprints behind us, one heavy and booted, one light and small. "Look, Jimmy," she said, pointing to a piece of driftwood that had washed ashore. "It looks like a whale," I smiled. "It does." "Maybe we can put it in the garden," she suggested. "The roses would look nice next to it." "We can put it wherever you want, Mom," I said. "It is your garden," she squeezed my arm. "It is our garden, Jimmy." We turned around to walk back. The tide was coming in. The waves were reaching higher up the beach, washing over the footprints we had just made. I watched as the water erased the evidence of our passage, smoothing the sand until it was pristine and new again. The past was like those footprints. It was messy. It was deep. It showed where we had stumbled and where we had dragged our feet. But the tide of time was washing it away day by day. We could not change what happened. I could not give her back the 5 years she lost in that shed. I could not erase the memory of the cage, but I could give her today, and I could give her tomorrow. I looked at my mother. She was laughing at a seagull that had swooped down to steal a crab. Her face was turned toward the sun, and for a moment she looked completely at peace. I took a mental picture of that moment. This was my wealth. This was my fortune. This was the only thing worth fighting for. To anyone listening to my voice right now, to anyone who is far away from home, chasing a paycheck or a dream, I want you to listen to me. Do not just send money. Do not assume that no news is good news. Do not trust that everything is fine just because they tell you it is on the phone. Go home. Look into their eyes. Check the fridge. Look at the bruises they try to hide. The world is full of predators, and sometimes the most dangerous ones are the ones who share your last name. Do not let your hard work become the fuel for someone else's greed. Do not let your absence be the weapon they use against the people you love. Your money can be replaced. Your time cannot. And your mother. She is the only one you will ever have. I am James Miller. I am a mechanic. I am a son. And, finally, after a long, dark dive, I have finally surfaced. I am home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a difficult journey, but sharing it with you has been a part of my healing process. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below and tell me your country and your thoughts on what you would have done in my situation. If this story touched you, or if you believe in justice, please subscribe to the channel Calm Revenge Stories like this video and hit that hype button so we can share this message with more people who might need to hear it. Stay safe and hold your loved ones close.